The last time anyone wrote this family down on paper, America still believed the frontier was finished. And then like a smudge on an old map, they vanished. Not in the way people vanish in movies. No screaming headlines. No bodies. Just a blank space where names should be, as if the land itself decided to swallow them whole. And I found them by accident, the way you find the most cursed things in history while looking for something smaller. A coal lease dispute from the 1930s. A stack of brittle county records that smelled like basement mold and tobacco. The clerk, an old man with hands like knotted rope, kept glancing at me as I turned pages. He didn't ask what I was searching for. He asked what I had already found. That's the first warning you get in places like this. People don't worry about what you want. They worry about what you'll uncover. And there was a parcel of land up in a cut of the mountains where the roads turned to gravel, then to mud, then to nothing. The deed had been corrected. So many times it read like an argument. And on every version, the same surname surfaced, faint but persistent, like a bruise under skin. Harlow. And no birth certificates after 1912, no school enrollment, no church rolls. Yet the tax ledger showed a payment every year, sometimes in cash, sometimes in labor, sometimes in something the recorder refused to define. A family that didn't go to town, didn't bury their dead in public ground, didn't marry in any chapel anyone could remember. But they paid their taxes, just enough to keep the county's hands off the property and its eyes turned away. And people nearby called the place Harlow Hollow, but they said it the way you say mine shaft or sinkhole, a location and a warning in one breath. Hunters swore they'd seen laundry lines deep in the tree cover, cloth moving without wind. A postal carrier claimed a girl watched him from the ridge for 3 days straight, never blinking, never stepping closer, like she was learning the shape of him for later. And then there were the sounds. In the 1970s, a ham radio operator logged a transmission that didn't match any call sign, just a man's voice repeating numbers, slow and trembling like prayer. The signal triangulated to the hollow. The operator notified the sheriff. The sheriff never filed a report. The operator, according to his wife, stopped turning on the radio after that night. He started locking the doors during the day. And what makes an American family choose isolation so total it erases them from the nation's memory? And what do they do up there, year after year, when no one is watching except the people who tried? Before you can understand what a family becomes in isolation, you have to understand what the land demands from anyone who tries to live on it. This part of the country looks gentle on postcards, blue ridges, hardwood forests, creek water flashing like coins. But the hollow is different. It's a bowl of steep slopes and tight timber that holds sound the way a cellar holds damp. Once you drop in, the world above feels far away, like a former life you can't quite prove happened. And the earliest record of the Harlow name in that county isn't a birth or a marriage. It's a complaint, 1879, trespass and unlawful trapping, filed by a neighboring farmer who claims his snares were being cut and his dogs were coming home with their throats opened. The handwriting is neat, almost polite, but the last line breaks that calm. Whoever lives up the hollow does not want witnesses. And a year later, the census taker lists a Harlow Elias with a wife and 3 children. No ages, no first names for the children, just hash marks. The kind of entry you make when you're standing at a fence line and a man refuses to let you count what's behind him. The census man's notes survive in the margin. Refused questions. Watches from tree line, it's the only time an official ever admits fear in ink. And local history books, those thin, self-published volumes sold at diners, try to tame it. They say the Harlows came after the war, like many did, chasing cheap land and a place to start over. They say start over, the way polite people say run. In oral accounts, the Harlows weren't pioneers. They were a family who arrived with too many tools and not enough story. They never attended revivals, never joined the lodge, never sent children to school. When the county built the one-room schoolhouse downriver, the teacher was paid extra to walk a lesson plan up the hollow once a week, and her name was Margaret Lyle. She was 22, the kind of woman who kept letters tied with ribbon and believed ignorance was a solvable problem. In October of 1908, she signed the school ledger at noon, wrote to Harlow Place, beside the entry, and was never seen again, and there's no dramatic search in the newspapers. Just a short piece on page 4, Miss Lyle absent, presumed eloped. Presumed, a word that does a lot of work when a town wants a problem to disappear. But in the courthouse basement, I found something else, an invoice for 3 days, deputy service, and 2 boxes, 38 cartridges, paid the same week she vanished, and next to it, folded into the file like someone tried to hide it in plain sight, a single line in pencil: do not go past the second gate. They have a way of making you stay. There are places in America where the law isn't enforced so much as negotiated. The hollow was one of them. On county maps, it was a thin crease of unnamed land, no roads drawn in, No structures marked, just contour lines packed so tight they looked like stitches. In the tax books, though, the hollow had a pulse. Every year, the Harlows paid just enough to remain a citizen on paper while living like a nation unto themselves, and that second gate kept showing up. It wasn't just a warning scribbled by a nervous clerk. It appeared in a deputy's report from 1916, one that was never filed properly, just stuffed into the back of a folder like a guilty thought. The deputy wrote that the first gate was old split, rail half fallen, the second gate was newer, reinforced, and wired with a bell made from scrap iron. I approached, he wrote, and before I touched the latch, someone rang the bell from the other side, and he never saw who rang it. He only heard the sound travel up the timber like a signal. Then he described movement, shadows between trees, circling, careful and practiced. He called out, announced himself, tried to keep his voice official. He wrote that he felt as if speaking made me smaller, and when he finally left, he didn't describe being chased. That would have been easier. Instead, he described being watched all the way back to town, not by a face, but by an awareness. I did not see them, he wrote, but I knew when they were behind me, and I knew when they stopped. And the next time the hollow reached out and touched the outside world was the winter of 1933. The Depression had people hungry enough to swallow pride, and the county was hungry enough to accept strange bargains. In the ledger, the Harlows' taxes that year were paid not in cash but in provisions rendered. No detail, no itemization, just a signature from the treasurer and a stain beside it that looks, even now, like old grease. And that same winter, a traveling midwife named Edna Birch recorded a call up the hollow. Her notebook survives because it was found in her trunk after she died. Most entries are clinical, dates, weights, fevers, but the Harlow entry is different. The handwriting tightens, as if her hand remembered fear. She wrote, "Child delivered in dark. Mother would not speak. Father watched from corner. Other children present, too quiet. Their eyes like they were waiting for instruction." And she never wrote, Harlow, again. But 2 months later, she wrote something that feels like confession. Some families don't isolate to protect themselves from the world. They isolate to protect the world from what they have made. And that's when you start to understand the true shape of the hollow. Not a hiding place, a containment. By the time the country marched into the Second World War, the hollow still didn't exist to most Americans. But war has a way of dragging even the hidden into the light. Draft boards went looking for every able-bodied man, and in 1942 a clerk in the county seat circled an absence that bothered him. No Harlow boys registered, not one. And a letter went out, no reply. A second letter came back, unopened, the envelope stained and torn as if it had been dragged through mud. A deputy was assigned, young, confident, eager to prove himself. His mother later told a neighbor he left that morning with his hat squared and his shirt starched, joking about mountain folk and ghost families. He returned after dark with his hat missing and his eyes fixed on something nobody else could see. And he didn't put a full story in writing, but he spoke enough to leave fingerprints in other people's memories. At the diner, he said there were more of them than there should be, and that the faces didn't match the ages. Children with old eyes, adults who moved like they'd never had to perform normalcy. He said he heard a bell, iron on iron, before he ever saw a structure, and that the sound made his stomach tighten, like an animal recognizing a trap, and he claimed he reached the second gate and found a sign nailed to a post. No name, no warning in plain language, just a single sentence, carved so deeply the wood split around it, WEKEPOEUROWN. And in the weeks after, the deputy stopped sleeping. When he did drift off, he woke shouting numbers. Not the numbers from that ham radio transmission, different ones. He wouldn't explain. His wife said he began measuring the windows at night, as if expecting someone to test the frames. 6 months later, he resigned, moved 2 counties over, and never returned calls from anyone who still lived near the hollow. And officially, the county closed the matter with a shrug. There were always excuses available when the truth was too heavy. The road was impassable. The property was private. The family was self-sufficient. And besides, nobody wanted to be the man who pushed too hard and stirred something that had been sleeping. But the paper trail doesn't disappear completely. It just became 1951. A state welfare worker filed a routine request after hearing rumor of unregistered children in the backcountry. Her supervisor denied it in red ink, and 2 years later, a church group attempted a mission trip carrying sacks of flour and hymn books. They came back with everything they brought except the hymn books. The pastor told his congregation the books were accepted. Privately, he told his wife he'd never felt so unwelcome on American soil. She wrote in her diary that he washed his hands for an hour when he got home, scrubbing until the knuckles bled, whispering, "They didn't want the food. They wanted us to know they could take what they wanted." And the hollow wasn't just isolated. It was organized, and whatever held the Harlows together up there, whatever rule they lived under, it wasn't the kind you discuss with outsiders. In the archives, the most important documents are rarely the ones that look important. The loud papers, newspaper clippings, warrants, headlines, those have already been filtered through pride and panic. The real story hides in forms, in checkboxes, in the places where an official had to choose between telling the truth and keeping their job. And in 1967, a state health department inspection logged notes in a regulated dwelling cluster in the backcountry, no address, no photographs. Just a hand-drawn arrow and a line that reads, multiple related occupants, refuse to cooperate, recommend no further contact without law enforcement. It's written like it's about sanitation. But it isn't. It's about fear. And that same year, a girl appeared at a gas station 2 towns over, barefoot. Hair cut uneven, like it had been done with a kitchen blade. She gave the attendant a name that didn't match any birth record. She didn't ask for help at first. She asked for distance. How far is the bus? She said. Not where, not when. How far? Like distance was the only kind of safety she understood, and her statement was taken by a deputy who, to his credit, wrote down what she said instead of what sounded reasonable. She described being raised on rules spoken like scripture. Doctors, no schools, no leaving past the second gate without a man of the family. She said children learned early not to cry loud, because loud crying calls them. When asked who, them, where she stared for a long time and finally answered, the ones that keep order, and the deputy asked about her parents. She didn't seem to understand the question. She answered by describing a house where everyone was olt or uncle, whether it was true or not, because names were dangerous. Names could be traced. She said birthdays weren't celebrated because counting makes God notice. When the deputy pressed her, what did that mean? She began to shake and repeated a phrase like she'd been trained. We keep our own. We keep our own. And then, the line that makes the hair rise on the back of your neck if you've ever studied hidden American violence. She said she wasn't the first to try to leave. She was just the first who made it past the ridge without being brought back. They don't like runaways, she whispered. They don't like to waste what's already theirs, and the case file ends abruptly. No follow-up, no court, no rescue mission into the hollow, just a stamp note to Tilansfara Tionotara GNCY, and in the margin, in a different hand, 3 words that feel like a verdict, not our problem. And if you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? By the 1970s, the world had learned to photograph itself. Satellites, aerial surveys, new highways cutting through old counties like fresh scars. It became harder for any pocket of America to remain truly unseen, and that's when the hollow started leaking, and the ham radio transmission from 1974 wasn't just a campfire rumor. I tracked down the logbook, then the man's surviving tape reel, stored in a shoebox his son kept because he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. On the audio, you hear static first, thick as rainfall, then a voice, male, exhausted, repeating a string of numbers in groups of 3. Not random, patterned, like coordinates or inventory, or prayers broken into manageable pieces, and halfway through, the numbers stop. There's breathing. Then the same voice says, very softly, I didn't mean to look. And after that, one clean metallic strike like iron hit with a hammer, a bell. And people who've never lived near remote land don't understand what a bell can mean. It's not decodication. It's a signal that moves faster than footsteps through trees. In the deputy report decades earlier, the bell was a warning. On the tape, it sounded like a sentence being carried out, and 3 years later, a forestry flyover marked an unregistered clearing where no clearing should have been. The pilot took a single photo, grainy, half-tilted. You can't make out faces, but you can see geometry where nature usually refuses it, a rectangle of bare ground, a tight ring of structures, and at the center, something upright casting a thin shadow like a post. The photo was filed, then misplaced, then lost. But copies have a way of surviving when someone wants insurance against forgetting. And in 1982, the county finally tried to widen the old gravel road that died before it reached the hollow. A bulldozer operator hit a buried line of metal, scrap welded together, chained, reinforced. It wasn't a fence meant to keep animals in. It was a barricade meant to keep people out. When the operator climbed down to inspect it, he found something else wired to the chain, a child's shoe, dried and cracked, hung like a charm, and he quit that afternoon. Not because of the shoe itself, he later told his brother, but because of what came after. He said the woods went quiet in a way he'd never heard, no birds, no insects. And then, from up the slope, the bell rang once, not frantically, not as an alarm, as a confirmation, and the road project was cancelled within 48 hours. Official reasoning, budget shortfall. Unofficial reasoning traveled through the town like cigarette smoke. They rang the bell. And then this is the part that settles like cold dust in your chest. The hollow didn't survive a century by luck. It survived because whenever the outside world pressed too close, someone inside answered with a language the county understood without translating. A language of consequences. In the end, what finally brought the hollow back into the record wasn't courage. It was development, the kind that arrives with survey stakes and contracts indifferent to local superstition. In 1996, a timber company bought adjacent land and began marking boundaries. A young surveyor named Daniel Klein wrote in his field journal about odd markers. Deep in the tree line, scraps of cloth tied high on branches, not like trail ribbons but like warnings. He also wrote about the smell, sweet rot, like a fruit cellar. 2 days later, he failed to return from a routine line check, and his disappearance did what decades of rumor couldn't. It produced paperwork. The state police got involved, and for a moment, the hollow was treated like what it had always been, a problem the county couldn't keep swallowing. And search teams pushed up to the first gate, then the second. They documented the bell, the reinforced wire, the carved sentence, "Do we keep your Oduin," still visible in the weathered wood. Beyond it, they found a footpath worn into the earth, not wide enough for a vehicle, but too maintained to be animal-made. Human traffic. Regular. Intentional. And they advanced a quarter-mile and found the first structure, a shed built from mismatched boards, patched like it had been repaired 100 times by people who never went to a hardware store. Inside were tools laid out with obsessive care, and a ledger, not a diary, and accounting, columns of dates and initials. Besides some entries, a symbol that looked like a cross at first glance, until you noticed the extra line, turning it into something more like a brand, and the police report calls the next discovery, "disturbing personal effects." That's the official phrase for a box of driver's licenses, social security cards, and military dog tags that did not belong to anyone in that county. Items taken from outsiders, kept not for money but for proof. Trophies, yes, but also inventory. Evidence that the hollow had been touched by the modern world and chose to keep what touched it. And the search team did not find living Harlows that day. What they found instead were signs of recent evacuation, warm ash in a stove, bed still dented, a pot of water left on a table filmed over with skin. It's one of the most chilling details in the file because it suggests planning, not a panicked flight, a practiced procedure, rehearsed over generations. Disappear when the light gets too bright. And then, down by the creek, they found a small graveyard hidden under laurel. No headstones, just flat rocks. Some engraved with initials, some with nothing. One grave had been dug up and refilled, the soil disturbed like someone had retrieved what was buried there. And in Daniel Klein's journal, recovered from his truck, there was one final line written in a shaking hand. "I saw them standing in a row, not hiding, waiting. Like I was late." And the case officially remains unsolved. The timber company backed out. The land changed hands quietly. The second gate, locals say, is still there. The bell still hangs. And if you ask the right old men at the right diner, they'll tell you the hollow doesn't need to kidnap anyone anymore. And because the worst possibility isn't that the family is gone, and it's that the family learned how to blend.